Good evening, Sapina. Thanks
Good
very
evening,
much
Thank you
for joining us this evening. It is sad, isn't it? Workers who innocently went up to a company, got to their jobs, they're now finding themselves in this situation. Do they have options? Will they have the recourse?
Yes, well, it's not just the workers, it's of course the extended families that will suffer, as we see with all cases similar to this. And yes, well, fortunately there are recourses. The first recourse I would hope is to see is that there would be some sort of intervention, in particular from the unions or some interested parties, that would intervene and convert this into a process of business rescue. Because if they don't have that, the application itself and being registered by the Registrar of Companies means that these employees are automatically suspended. They have no income, they have no benefits, and that's the result of the current status of affairs. Of course, there is in the interim what may happen is an intervention, as I've mentioned, or there may be a convening meeting called ASAP, and that may result in some key people being identified to continue. They would then be remunerated. But I'm afraid for the majority of people, one would rather hope to see some sort of business rescue.
Mm-hmm. But now what would you say about legislation? To what extent could it be so grossly unfair? Because even if the things you're talking about will happen, a little later on, but there is this instability that this is going to create for the workers and, as you say, their extended families. Does the law take that into account, that when a situation like this arises, there is that potential of really dealing a huge blow to lives of people who are really finding themselves, in the middle of it, in the crossfire, as it were?
Yeah. Well, sadly, the same happens when there's a retrenchment, because again, that's a no-fault termination. Similarly here, there's a no-fault termination. And unfortunately, the law can't provide money, because that's ideally what you want. You want somebody to come in and rescue the company. They may even, under these circumstances, and that's what the law provides for somebody to take over this business or part of the business. And the law provides under those circumstances, there's a Section 197 of the Labour Relations Act that provides for those employees to be then taken over by the new employer. But that's to the extent only that the law provides for protection.
But then, if there is, say the allegations are indeed true, that essentially this business was built on proceeds of crime. So the person who will want to take that over, if they know that these contracts are actually questionable and may be ended at any time, so what will you be taking over?
They'll be extremely reluctant to do so, simply for that reason, Vuyo, as you correctly pointed out. Because those contracts may be under review, they may be cancelled, and the new owner would have an empty inheritance, so to speak. So somebody will consider seriously before they take over such a business.
Of course, what precipitated all of this is the bank's decision to close these guys' accounts. Are the laws very clear about the circumstances under which the banks can do that? Are they clear?
Well, I'm not sure if any law is ever that clear, but I think there's always a risk. The banks operate under certain financial constraints and certain financial regulations, and they must act accordingly. And similar to the Gupta time when you had the banks intervening at that stage, they actually duty-bound to intervene under those circumstances, as they did here. But unfortunately, as you correctly pointed out, we're dealing with a company that will probably not win some sort of Nobel Prize for honesty, and the workers will suffer.
But then, the fact of the matter is that, again, yes, it's not the fault of the banks that the company operated the way it did, but then the fallout, from this is that the banks will stay with their, clean reputations. But then there's unintended consequences
Absolutely.
For those people lower down.
Absolutely.
Is that system fair?
Well, whether it's fair or not is probably another debate. The question is, you must strike the balance. You must strike a balance between capital interest and labour's interest. And we know that when legislation was drafted, there was huge interaction between the unions and capital at the time, and of course with the tripartite alliance within and with the government. So that was there, and they came up with the legislation that we're currently dealing with. So the result of that was, of course, the Labour Relations Act, the Companies Act, and all of that. Whether that's always fair, well, as I've indicated, that's potentially another debate.
I mean, but could these banks not have acted much earlier? Because if you look at the sort of amounts and the transactions that have come before the State Capture Commission, one ought to have asked some questions. That who would be, withdrawing these huge amounts of money on such a regular basis?
And the same you would have seen at the time with the Gupta accounts. And one would have accepted earlier intervention. And certainly those questions will be asked. Questions will be asked towards those financial institutions. Questions will be asked to the directors. And there may be some sort of accountability there. And maybe that's one of the first cases after the Brown case where there's a proper investigation into directors' conduct and somebody may or may not be jailed for that. But time will tell. But that ultimately, as you correctly pointed out, it doesn't assist the poor employee and his or her family that's out in the street tonight and hoping for some sort of business rescue.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
For coming through. Hugo Pinar, who is a labour lawyer and director at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer.